I talk a lot to my audiences about what I believe to be incontrovertible facts. And I think that the fundamental incontrovertible fact is that life is suffering. And I think that that's why that's a primary axiom of religious belief, in some sense, almost regardless of the faith, that life is suffering. And everyone knows that, although they don't necessarily like to admit it or to talk about it. I mean, you don't have to scrape beneath the surface very far in someone's life to find a tragedy lurking if the person that you're speaking with doesn't have something pretty awful happening to them right at the moment, economically or socially or within their family or physically or mentally. The probability that someone they love has a problem of that sort is extraordinarily high. And if you happen to be among the fortunate minority for whom that isn't true, well, all you have to do is wait, and it will be true soon enough, and sooner than you think, and worse than you imagine. And everyone knows that. And so it's easy to understand why people become cynical and bitter and hurt and nihilistic. Now, I think there's a progression in life. You know, if you're naive, you think that life will be easy and that people are basically good, and then you have some experiences if you're not sheltered too much, and that gets taken away from you because you betray yourself or other people betray you, or you encounter a tragedy, and then your naivety is shattered, and the most likely place that you'll go from there is into something approximating cynicism, because you don't know the alternative, and your initial faith, which was not faith but naivety, is shattered by the terrible reality of what you encounter. Will make it far worse. And so the question is, what might constitute an alternative to that? And if there is an alternative, and you know, I learned a while back, long while back, reading religious mythology mostly, that there is a difference between bitter pangs of conscience, but you do. And the reason you do is because you're doing things that are wrong and you should stop, and you know it, maybe you can't. And then, well, let's say then the opposite is that you admire someone who can take responsibility for himself or herself. That's a start. And then maybe you admire someone even more if they've forged their character sufficiently to move past cynicism so that not only they take responsibility for themselves, but they can take responsibility for their family. No, and they're there for the people who love them when it's necessary. And if you do that, then you have something, I wouldn't say necessarily to be proud of, but at least you have one less thing to upbraid yourself with. And that's something. And then you can move past that and you can say, well, maybe if you put yourself together enough, carefully enough, spoke the truth enough, were courageous enough, in spite of the reasons you have not to be, that you could also be someone of benefit to yourself and your family and your community, and you partake in structuring things in a harmonious manner by living in that way. It's not an individual focused ethos. It's an ethos of harmony among levels. You should do what's good for you, but it has to be what's good for your family at the same time, and it has to be what's good for you and your family and your community at the same time. And that works musically, it makes all the levels work in harmony. And you can tell when that's happening. And this is another thing that's of great utility to know, is that when you're in that place where you're acting in the proper manner and you're facing things courageously and you're speaking the truth, you're imbued with a sense of fundamental meaning. And that meaning is the antidote to the catastrophe of life. And it's the antidote psychologically, because you have to have that meaning, because otherwise your life is too dark and too dreadful and it will corrupt you. So it's the antidote psychologically, but it's also the antidote practically, because we're not nothing, us human beings. They say that we're made in the image of God. And it's hard to say what that means, but it means, at least in part, to participate in the process of bringing the good into being. And we can all do that, and the opposite. And if we accept our responsibility to ourselves and to other people and to our communities, and we lift that load up, then we live lives that are meaningful, and that stops us from being corrupt. It provides us with a medication against catastrophe, and it also practically improves the world. That's the other thing. It's not just psychological. You can make things worse. Everyone knows that. And no doubt you have in many ways. But you can make things better. And they actually get better. And there's a reason for hope. And there's something to be said to know that you're the sort of creature that can look mortality and catastrophe and malevolence straight in the eye, so to speak, and nonetheless stand up and do what's right, and that all there is in that is good. And that's what I've been telling people.